In the gleaming metropolis of Anderix, the capital city of the Kasharn Empire, towering structures made of silver and blue glass stretched high into the sky. The streets below were crowded with people of various alien species, all bustling with purpose. The city was a hub of technology and power, home to the most advanced beings in the galaxy. The Kasharn, a race known for their intellectual superiority, had ruled over countless worlds for centuries. Their technology was unmatched, and their pride was as vast as the universe itself. Among them, Princess Zrathia was a prominent figure. She was known for her sharp wit, unmatched beauty, and, above all, her arrogance. As the daughter of the Kasharn Emperor, she was groomed to lead, to conquer, to command. Nothing, it seemed, could touch her. Her empire was endless. Her enemies were nothing but insects beneath her feet, and her people were the most advanced civilization in the galaxy. But on this day, Zrathia was about to meet something, or rather, someone who would challenge her worldview. A diplomatic mission had brought a small group of humans to Anderix. The humans were an up-and-coming species in the galaxy, known for their resilience and adaptability, but they were still relatively new to the galactic stage. Most of the advanced civilizations viewed them with mild curiosity and some disdain. Their technology was far behind that of the Kasharn, and they had yet to make a significant impact on galactic politics. The human delegation had been invited to a grand banquet in the palace of Anderix. Zrathia, ever the skeptic, had little interest in the humans or their primitive ways. She expected the evening to be a tedious formality, full of meaningless small talk. The humans would bow and smile, and she would nod politely, feigning interest in their primitive technology and culture. As the banquet began, Zrathia stood in the grand hall, a perfect vision of royal elegance. The room was filled with guests from various alien races, all speaking in low murmurs, admiring the opulence of the palace. Golden chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting a soft, warm glow over the guests. The floor was made of polished marble, and the walls were adorned with intricate alien artwork, depicting the glories of the Kasharn Empire. The humans had taken their place among the other guests, their awkwardness barely hidden. They were dressed in formal attire, simple yet dignified. But Zrathia couldn't help but feel a sense of superiority. She watched them from across the room, noting how out of place they seemed, how uncomfortable they were in their foreign surroundings. It amused her. One human in particular caught her eye. Captain Eric Kavanaugh, the leader of the human delegation, stood near the center of the room, speaking with some of the other guests. He was tall, with dark hair and sharp features. His eyes, though, were what intrigued her the most. They were calm, steady, and held an air of quiet confidence. Unlike the others, he didn't seem to be nervous or out of place. There was something about him that felt different, though Zrathia couldn't quite place it. As the evening wore on, Zrathia found herself drawn to him, though she would never admit it. She watched as he interacted with the other guests. His movements were deliberate, calculated, but not stiff. His speech was measured, but not pompous. He didn't fawn over her like so many other beings did. He didn't flatter her or try to win her favor. Instead, he observed the room with quiet interest, as though he were studying everything around him. Zrathia's curiosity began to grow, and she felt a strange desire to confront him. It wasn't often that someone, especially a human, didn't react to her presence with awe or deference. She decided to approach him. The moment she walked up to him, a hush fell over the room. The eyes of the guests were all on her, and she knew it. She smiled inwardly, enjoying the attention, but she kept her face neutral as she addressed Eric. "You must be Captain Eric Kavanaugh," she said, her voice laced with a subtle challenge. "Tell me, human, what brings you to our world?" Eric turned toward her, his eyes meeting hers without hesitation. He offered a polite, but not overly warm, smile. "Princess Zrathia, it's an honor to be here. We're here on a diplomatic mission. Humanity seeks to build relationships with the great empires of the galaxy, to learn and to grow." Zrathia studied him for a moment, her gaze sharp. "Learn? Grow? How quaint. You're a species barely out of its infancy." And yet you believe you can stand among us. Tell me, Captain, what makes you think your people can contribute anything of value to the galaxy? Eric didn't flinch at her words. He simply shrugged. We may not have the advanced technology or the centuries of experience that your people do. But we have something else. We have resilience. We have the will to survive, to adapt, to change, and we have an ability to learn that no one else in the galaxy has. Zrathia's lips curled into a smile, though it wasn't a kind one. She had heard such words before, from other species who fancied themselves capable of greatness. But there was something about Eric's tone that irked her. He wasn't pleading for approval. He wasn't begging for her favor. He was speaking as if he truly believed his people had something to offer. Resilience? She said, mocking. How charming. But tell me, Captain, what makes you think resilience is enough? The Kasharn have conquered entire galaxies, built empires, and created wonders beyond your comprehension. And you think a will to survive will help your people stand against us? Eric's expression remained calm. I don't think we need to stand against anyone. But if we had to, we would. And we would do it not with technology, but with the strength of our people. Zrathia was about to respond with another biting remark. But before she could, one of her advisors, a tall and imposing Kasharn noble, stepped forward. Princess, perhaps it would be wise to move on to other matters. The humans may not be as advanced as we are, but they are guests in our palace. We should show them some courtesy. Zrathia turned to the advisor, her eyes narrowing in annoyance. She hated being interrupted, especially when it came to matters of her own superiority. But instead of arguing, she simply nodded, dismissing the conversation. Very well. We shall continue the festivities. But don't think I've forgotten about your words, Captain. Eric gave a small nod of his own. I wouldn't expect you to, Princess. As Zrathia turned to leave, she cast one last glance at Eric. Something about him unsettled her. He was too calm, too collected for a human. He didn't fit the mold of what she expected. She had faced warriors, diplomats, and leaders from countless species. But none had been quite like him. There was something different about the humans, something that could not be ignored. She would find out what it was, she decided. She would make it her mission to see just what this resilience of the humans truly meant, and she would start with Eric Kavanaugh. The next day, the air in Anderix's grand palace felt thick with tension. The human delegation had been granted a private audience with Princess Zrathia, a rare honor for such a young and relatively unimportant species. The meeting was to discuss the terms of humanity's potential alliance with the Kasharn Empire. But in truth, Zrathia had no intention of treating the humans as equals. She saw them as a curiosity, a fleeting spectacle that would soon be forgotten. However, she couldn't ignore the strange pull she felt toward Captain Eric Kavanaugh. The way he had looked at her the night before, as if her words meant nothing to him, stirred something inside her. It wasn't fear, but it was discomfort, something she wasn't used to. She had never been challenged in such a way. And though she would never admit it, that intrigued her. The human delegation was waiting in the meeting chamber, an extravagant room with walls made of shimmering metallic alloys, the finest materials the Kasharn could craft. The long, oval-shaped table sat at the center, and the seats around it were designed for beings of various sizes, but the one at the head of the table was reserved for the princess herself. As the doors opened, Zrathia walked in with her usual regal stride, her expression neutral, but her mind racing. Eric was already standing by the table, his posture straight, his uniform crisp. He nodded slightly as she entered, but it was his eyes that caught her attention again. They were calm, unwavering, and they never left hers. It was almost as if he were waiting for her to speak, not the other way around. Captain Kavanaugh, Zrathia began, her voice as cold as the steel that lined the room. I trust you've had a restful night? Thank you, Princess, Eric replied, his voice smooth but not overly formal. The accommodations are impressive. Your hospitality is appreciated." Zrathia waved a hand dismissively. "I suppose the humans have a knack for appreciating the little things." She made her way to the head of the table and sat down, crossing one leg over the other. "But we both know why you're here. You want to speak of alliances, trade, perhaps even military cooperation. But don't mistake my patience for interest. The Kasharn Empire has no need for weak allies." Eric remained standing, his hands clasped behind his back. "We're not asking for your charity, Princess. We're offering an opportunity for mutual growth." Zrathia tilted her head, studying him carefully. "Is that so? And what makes you think your species, barely out of its infancy, has anything to offer us? You've barely begun to master space travel, let alone the art of war." She could see the faintest smile tug at the corners of Eric's lips, though it wasn't a mocking one. It was more like a smile of understanding, as though he knew exactly what she was thinking. "I think you're underestimating us, Princess. Humanity may not be as advanced as your people, but we have something you don't." Zrathia's eyes narrowed. "And what might that be?" "We have heart," Eric said simply, as though it were the most obvious thing in the universe. "We fight not because we are the most powerful, but because we must. We fight to protect what matters to us, our families, our freedom, our future." Zrathia's jaw tightened slightly, but she hid her reaction behind her stoic expression. It was clear she wasn't used to hearing such words from anyone, let alone from a human. "How charming," she said coldly. "But let's not pretend that heart will protect you from the might of the Kasharn Empire." Eric's expression didn't change. "You're right. We don't have the weapons or the technology you do. But we have something that's proven time and time again to be more valuable. The will to adapt and overcome." Zrathia scoffed. "Adapt? Overcome? You've barely survived a single galactic war. What makes you think you can stand against us in a real conflict?" Eric stepped closer to the table, his eyes never leaving hers. "Because we learn from every fight, every loss, every victory, and we grow stronger because of it. Your people may have advanced technology, but you've grown stagnant. Your empire is built on power alone, not on the strength of its people." Zrathia felt a flicker of something inside her, though she quickly masked it. She had heard such sentiments before from lesser species, but never with such conviction, and never from someone so seemingly insignificant. The human was persistent, and that was something she couldn't ignore. For a moment, the room was silent, save for the faint hum of the palace's artificial gravity system. Zrathia studied Eric intently, trying to find a flaw, a weakness, something that would allow her to dismiss him as just another foolish human, but there was none. The man's resolve was unwavering, and it made her uneasy. "So, you want us to believe that your heart and your will are enough to make your species worthy of our alliance?" she asked, her tone still dripping with skepticism. "I'm not asking you to believe it, Princess," Eric replied, his voice steady. "I'm asking you to see it for yourself." Zrathia leaned back in her chair, her fingers tapping lightly on the table. She had no intention of making this easy for him, but something inside her told her that this human wasn't going to be swayed by her usual tactics. He wasn't going to bow or grovel or beg for her favor. He was standing on equal ground, as though he knew something she didn't. "I've heard enough of this," Zrathia said, her tone final. "We'll settle this matter in a more direct way. I propose a challenge. A duel, Captain Kavanaugh, you and I. It will settle this once and for all. If you win, we'll consider your request. If you lose, well, you'll have proven that your people are as insignificant as we've always thought." "Are we?" Eric didn't flinch at the proposal. He knew the Kasharn valued strength above all else, and he had no intention of backing down. But he also understood that this was a test, not just of physical prowess, but of character. The princess wanted to prove something. To herself and to him, she wanted to see if the human was truly worthy of anything more than contempt. "I accept your challenge, Princess," he said simply. Zrathia's lips curled into a smile, though it was more of a sneer than anything else. Very well then. We'll have the duel tomorrow, at noon, in the Royal Arena. I look forward to seeing how a heart and a will fare against the power of the Kasharn." The human delegation was dismissed, and Eric left the room with a sense of purpose. Zrathia watched him leave, her thoughts swirling. She had underestimated him before, but now she was curious. She would show him that no amount of heart could ever match the might of the Kasharn. And once the duel was over, there would be no more talk of alliances. Humanity would learn its place. But in the quiet of her chamber that night, Zrathia couldn't help but wonder, what if Eric wasn't as foolish as she had first thought? What if his people really did have something she couldn't see? The thought gnawed at her as she prepared for the challenge that awaited her on the morrow. The Royal Arena was a massive structure, built to showcase the strength and power of the Kasharn Empire. It was located at the heart of the palace, a grand coliseum with walls made of reinforced titanium and glass, allowing the spectators to look down on the arena floor from every angle. The stands were packed with Kasharn nobility and officials, all eager to witness the spectacle. Eric Kavanagh stood in the center of the arena, his boots sinking slightly into the soft sand beneath him. The air was thick with tension. He had prepared himself for this moment, though he knew it wasn't just about the physical fight. This was about pride. And Zrathia would do everything in her power to destroy him, not just in the duel, but in every way she could. But Eric wasn't going to make it easy. He wasn't about to back down, no matter what the Kasharn believed. He stood tall, feeling the weight of the eyes on him, but his focus was entirely on the princess. He could already feel the pulse of his heart quickening, but his mind remained calm. His stance was steady, his grip firm on the sword he carried. It wasn't the most advanced weapon, but it had served humanity for generations. It had a history, and that, in itself, was its strength. The roar of the crowd grew louder as Zrathia entered the arena. She was a striking figure, her tall frame and sharp features unmistakable. Dressed in lightweight armor that glowed faintly with the energy running through it, she moved with a fluid grace that seemed almost unnatural. Her eyes locked onto Eric immediately, a confident smirk playing on her lips. She stopped at the opposite end of the arena, raising her hand to silence the crowd. The Kasharn warriors and nobles fell into an expectant silence, waiting for her to speak. "Today," Zrathia's voice rang out across the arena, "we will see if the humans truly have what they claim to possess. If Captain Kavanagh can defeat me, the Kasharn will begin to consider an alliance with your people. But if he loses," she let the words hang in the air, knowing the weight of them would settle in the minds of everyone watching. If he lost, it would confirm every belief the Kasharn had about the weakness of humanity. She would show them once and for all that humans were nothing more than ants under the boot of the mighty Kasharn Empire. She drew her weapon, a long, glowing energy blade that hummed with power. The crowd let out a collective cheer as the blade crackled with energy. Zrathia's stance was perfect, graceful, controlled, and ready to strike. Eric didn't flinch. He unsheathed his sword slowly, deliberately, his grip steady. His weapon was nothing like Zrathia's. It wasn't sleek or advanced, but it had history and power all its own. It had been passed down through generations, forged with skill and care, and Eric wasn't about to let anyone take that from him. The duel began with a sharp, ringing sound as their swords met. The clash of energy and metal echoed across the arena, sending vibrations through the air. Zrathia was fast, her movements calculated and precise. Every strike was a blow aimed to defeat, to dominate. But Eric was ready. He parried her first strike with ease, stepping back to gain some distance. He was slower than her, but he wasn't about to let that stop him. He had something she didn't experience. Zrathia pressed forward, her blade flashing through the air with incredible speed. She was relentless, attacking with a speed and precision that would have overwhelmed most opponents. But Eric wasn't most people. He moved with purpose, his every step calculated to avoid her attacks while searching for an opening. She struck again, faster this time, her blade coming in from the left. Eric barely managed to deflect it, but the force of the blow sent a shockwave through his arms. His sword was a heavy weapon compared to hers, and he could feel the strain. But he refused to let it show. He adjusted his stance, lowering his center of gravity to make his next strike more powerful. Zrathia's eyes narrowed. She had expected the human to fall apart under pressure. But instead, he seemed to be growing more focused. She could see the look in his eyes. He wasn't intimidated. She had underestimated him. And that angered her. "Is that all you've got?" she taunted, her voice full of mockery as she circled him, looking for an opening. "Your kind may have heart, but it won't save you here." Eric didn't respond. He didn't need to. Instead, he shifted his weight and lunged forward with a powerful strike. His sword came down hard, aiming for her chest. Zrathia barely managed to parry it in time. But the sheer force of the blow sent her stumbling back. The crowd gasped. They had never seen anyone land a blow on the princess. The Kasharn were known for their grace and strength, and Zrathia was their pride. But Eric had done it. Zrathia growled in frustration, her eyes flashing with fury. She attacked again, this time faster and more ferocious. Her blade slashed through the air, leaving a trail of sparks as it came down at Eric's head. He blocked it, but the impact sent a jolt through his entire body. He staggered, his footing momentarily unsteady, but he recovered quickly, spinning to the side to avoid another deadly swing from Zrathia. His heart pounded in his chest, and sweat beaded on his brow. But he didn't allow himself to become distracted. He had been trained for moments like this. Zrathia's attacks were relentless, but they lacked the finesse of true combat. She relied too heavily on her technology and speed, and Eric could sense the pattern in her strikes. She was trying to overwhelm him, to make him make a mistake, but Eric had learned to fight without relying on technology. He fought with his mind, with his instincts, and he was beginning to predict her movements. The battle raged on, each strike sending shockwaves through the arena. The Kasharn watched with bated breath. Unsure of what to expect, the princess was supposed to be unbeatable. But this simple human was holding his own. Eric could feel the growing respect in the air, but he knew it wasn't enough. He couldn't afford to just hold his ground. He had to win. For humanity. For the future of his people. In a sudden burst of energy, Eric launched himself at Zrathia, his sword flashing in the sunlight. He struck at her with a series of calculated blows, pushing her back with every strike. His moves were fluid, his confidence building as he realized he had finally found the rhythm of the fight. Zrathia was backing up now, her footwork less graceful, more desperate. Her attacks were becoming less controlled, and Eric saw the first signs of doubt in her eyes. She was losing. Slowly, but surely, she was losing to a human. With one final, decisive move, Eric lunged forward, his sword aimed at her chest. Zrathia tried to block, but the strike was too powerful. Her blade clashed against his, but the impact caused her to stumble back. She couldn't regain her footing in time. Eric's sword stopped just inches from her heart. The silence in the arena was deafening. The entire Kasharn crowd was watching, stunned into stillness. Zrathia's breath came in short gasps as she looked at Eric, her expression a mixture of anger and disbelief. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, Eric lowered his sword. He didn't need to prove anything more. He had already won. Zrathia stood there, frozen, her face red with humiliation and fury. She couldn't bring herself to speak. She had been bested by a human. She, the great Princess Zrathia, had lost. Eric stepped back, lowering his weapon. "Your people are strong, Princess," he said quietly, his voice calm. "But strength alone isn't enough to win the galaxy." He turned and walked away, leaving Zrathia standing in the middle of the arena, unsure of what had just happened. The crowd, once silent, erupted into murmurs. The princess had been defeated, and the humans, those weak creatures, had proven their worth. The silence in the royal arena stretched on, thick and heavy, like a weight pressing down on everything in sight. Captain Eric Kavanagh stood still, his sword resting by his side, his chest heaving with the effort of the battle he had just fought. Sweat dripped down his face, but his expression was calm, unbroken. He had done it. He had defeated Princess Zrathia. Zrathia, the Kasharn princess who had stood as the pinnacle of power, the symbol of invincibility, was now on her knees. The energy blade she had wielded so confidently now lay discarded on the ground. Her armor was slightly scuffed, her breath shallow. The crowd in the stands remained eerily quiet, as if no one could believe what had just happened. The princess, their pride, had been bested by a human. Eric glanced over his shoulder, his eyes meeting Zrathia's. There was no taunt, no gloating in his expression, just a calm acknowledgement of what had transpired. She hadn't been an enemy to him. She had been a challenge, and he had risen to meet it. That was all. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, slowly, Zrathia pushed herself to her feet. Her hands trembled slightly, but she regained her composure quickly. As she always did, the princess, no matter her loss, would never let anyone see her weakness. She looked at Eric with an unreadable expression, her eyes narrowed. "You've won," she said quietly, her voice tinged with a strange mixture of frustration and reluctant admiration. "You beat me. But that doesn't change anything, human. The Kasharn Empire doesn't bow to anyone. We are not like your people." Eric didn't respond immediately. He simply took a step closer, lowering his sword to the ground. He didn't need to speak. His actions had already done enough. But there was something in Zrathia's words that made him pause. "You're right," he said after a moment. "The Kasharn Empire doesn't bow to anyone. But maybe that's the problem." He met her gaze, his voice steady. "You're so focused on strength that you've forgotten what truly makes an empire strong. It's not just power or technology. It's the people. It's the willingness to grow, to learn, to change." Zrathia flinched slightly, her sharp features betraying a hint of doubt. She had never thought about it that way. The Kasharn had always believed that their superiority was unquestionable. They had ruled with fear, with power, and they had never needed to consider the feelings or struggles of others. But Eric's words were planting seeds of doubt, ones she hadn't expected. "You're telling me that humanity is better because you can adapt?" she asked, her tone still skeptical but with a touch less arrogance. "Because you fight with heart and will? You think that will carry you through the galaxy?" Eric nodded slowly. "Yes, I do. We fight because we have to. We fight because there's something worth protecting. It's not always about winning every battle. It's about standing up, every single time, no matter how hard it gets. That's the true strength we have. And that's what makes humanity different." Zrathia's eyes flickered with something almost like curiosity. It was subtle, but it was there. She had never seen such conviction in anyone before, not from her own people, and certainly not from a human. She had spent her life believing that strength came from power, from domination. But Eric had just shown her something she hadn't expected. "You're still wrong, human," she said, though her voice lacked the same sharpness it had before. "The Kasharn don't need to learn from you." Eric smiled faintly, though there was no mockery in it. "Maybe not. But perhaps there's something your people can learn from us." A long silence followed as Zrathia processed his words. The crowd had started to murmur again, their shock slowly giving way to questions, to uncertainty. The princess had lost not just in the duel, but in a deeper, more fundamental way. The idea that a human could stand up to the might of the Kasharn and win was something that would shake the very foundation of her people's pride. Zrathia clenched her fists, frustration boiling beneath the surface. She had been humiliated. The defeat stung far more than she had expected. Her entire life had been built around the belief that the Kasharn were untouchable, that their strength could never be questioned. And now, a human, a species she had written off as inferior, had proven her wrong. But despite the sting of defeat, something else lingered, something she couldn't quite name. It wasn't anger, though there was plenty of that. It wasn't fear, though part of her had felt a flicker of it during the duel. No, it was something else. something new, a feeling of respect? Zrathia's thoughts were interrupted as one of her advisors, an older Kasharn noble, stepped forward from the crowd. His voice rang out with authority, demanding her attention. "Princess Zrathia," he called. "You've been defeated." "It is clear now that the humans—" Zrathia turned sharply, cutting him off with a look that could freeze anyone in their tracks. "I know," she said coldly, but her voice lacked the usual ice. "This duel is over, and I will deal with the consequences later." The noble paused, taken aback by the tone in her voice. He could see the shift in her. Something had changed. She wasn't the same unshakable leader she had been before. She was uncertain. Zrathia turned back to Eric, her eyes narrowing again. But this time, there was something different in her gaze. "I may have lost the duel, but that doesn't mean I accept defeat. The Kasharn Empire doesn't kneel to anyone, and neither will I. But," her voice softened, just slightly, "perhaps there is something worth considering about what you said. We are strong, but I wonder if we have been too proud, too rigid." Eric remained quiet, allowing her to speak. He wasn't here to win her approval. He wasn't here to force her to change. He was here to show her that there was more than one way to be strong, and that, sometimes, the greatest strength came from understanding, not just from overwhelming power. Zrathia's eyes flickered to the ground for a moment, a sign of her inner conflict. "I will speak to my father," she said finally, her voice steady again, though still holding a hint of uncertainty. "I will recommend that we consider an alliance with humanity. But don't think for a moment that this is the end of the story. We will never be as weak as you think. We will remain the rulers of this galaxy. But, perhaps, we can learn something from your people." Eric nodded, sensing that the conversation was reaching its natural conclusion. "That's all we ask. To be seen, to be understood, and to be given the chance to show you what we're capable of." Zrathia's gaze softened for the briefest of moments, before her usual icy exterior returned. "We shall see, human. We shall see." As Eric turned to leave the arena, he could feel the eyes of the Kasharn upon him. There was no victory march, no cheering from the crowd, but there was something else, something more powerful. The seed of change had been planted, and while the path ahead was uncertain, one thing was clear. Humanity had earned its place in the galaxy. They had proven that strength came not just from power, but from the heart, and that was something no one Kasharn or human could ever ignore.